This is Land of Havilah, Hosea 1. In this episode, we'll read and explain the Old Testament book Hosea. As usual, we'll read the entire book without skipping anything. We read from the World English Bible because it's an accurate translation from the original Hebrew, and it's not copyrighted. The World English Bible has the quirk of, which is fine with us, that it uses the name of God, which is Yahweh. Most English translations render Yahweh as Lord in all capital letters, but the World English Bible just keeps it as it is in Hebrew, which is Yahweh. Our name Land of Havilah comes from Genesis 2:11. It's a place with everything necessary for abundant life. Now the book of Hosea, starting in chapter 1, verse 1. Yahweh's word that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Comment in verse 1, Hosea tells us where he fits into history. He prophesied during the reigns of 4 kings who ruled over Judah and 1 who ruled over Samaria. This place is in between 791 and 746 BC. This was about 200 years after David. The book accurately describes the fall of Samaria that occurred in 722. Therefore, outside sources say the writer of this book must have witnessed the fall of Samaria. But that claim doesn't agree with what Hosea just said in verse 1. The kings he just mentioned in verse 1 didn't reign past about 746. Therefore, whatever he wrote about the fall of Samaria was prophecy, not history, according to Hosea's own claim. He saw at least 20 years into the future, if we choose to believe him in verse 1, which your narrator does, by the way. For an explanation of why your narrator is thoroughly convinced that prophecy is a valid thing, please see the Land of Havilah episode called Proof. Going on, verse 2. When Yahweh spoke at first by Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea, "Go take for yourself a wife of prostitution and children of unfaithfulness, for the land commits great adultery, forsaking Yahweh." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Yahweh said to him, "Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I'll avenge the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and will cause the kingdom of the house of Israel to cease. It will happen in that day that I'll break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." Comment in verses 1 to 5, Yahweh's first prophetic statement to Hosea was, "Go take a prostitute as your wife, and adopt her children also. They're the children of unfaithfulness. For the land commits great adultery, forsaking Yahweh." The meaning is that a prostitute is someone who spreads her attentions to multiple men, and the people of the land do something similar. They spread their attention to multiple gods. They've been that way ever since Egypt. Ezekiel 20, verses 7 and 8. Hosea was obedient to Yahweh's command in verse 3 and married a prostitute named Gomer. Her name means to fail and to quit. She failed her husband and quit on him, just as the people of the land failed and quit on Yahweh. Gomer was the daughter of Diblaim, which means 2 cakes. If there are 2 cakes, you can decide which one to eat, or you can eat them both, which is what you'll do if you don't restrict yourself to one. The people of the land need to decide for Yahweh. Anything else is disgusting from Yahweh's standpoint. He's a jealous God, Exodus 20, verse 5. In verses 3 and 4, time went by, and Gomer bore a son, and Yahweh said, "Call him Jezreel, for yet in a little while I'll avenge the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and will cause the kingdom of the house to cease." Jezreel means God sows, as in sowing seed, but more importantly, Jezreel is the name of a city in Samaria where Jehu rode in, killed King Ahab and all his family, and took the throne for himself, 2 Kings 9. It was a fine thing to do because God commanded it. The house of Ahab was under judgment for idolatry, and Jehu was God's instrument for carrying out that judgment. Problem was, Jehu turned to idolatry himself, and so did his heirs after him. Therefore it turned out that the blood of the house of Ahab was spilled for nothing, 2 Kings 10, 30 and 31. It was just the exchange of one idolatrous house for another. Therefore the house of Jehu has blood on their hands, and God's going to Jezreel them, Jezreel being synonymous with wiping out the royal family. Jehu Jezreeled the house of Ahab, so God will return the deed and Jezreel the house of Jehu. Technically, in the Hebrew dictionary, the word Jezreel means God sows, so God's going to sow the seeds of destruction in the house of Jehu. But in the informal meaning of the word, Jezreel means to wipe out. So now we should understand why the boy's name is Jezreel. It's a prophetic statement that God will wipe out the house of Jehu. And not just the house of Jehu, but in verse 4, God will cause all the kingdom of Israel to cease. And as one last reminder, the kingdom of Israel in this period of history is another name for the northern kingdom called Samaria. God will wipe them out. He'll Jezreel the whole country, as he says in verses 4 and 5. However, some will survive and go into captivity. Going on, verse 6. She conceived again and bore a daughter. Then he said to him, Call her name Lo-Ruhamah, for I'll no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, that I should in any way pardon them. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by Yahweh their God, and will not save them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. Comment in verse 6, Gomer conceived again, bore a daughter, and Yahweh said, Call her Lo-Ruhamah, which means not pitied. The prophetic interpretation is that Yahweh will not pity the kingdom of Israel or in any way pardon them. However, in verse 6, he'll save Judah, which is the southern kingdom. It turned out that after Yahweh destroyed Israel, he preserved Judah for another 133 years. As time went by, verse 8, Now when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. He said, Call his name Lo-Ammi, for you are not my people, and I will not be yours. Yet the number of the children of Israel will be as the sand of the sea, which can't be measured or counted. And it will come to pass that in the place where it was said to them, You're not my people, they'll be called sons of the living God. The children of Judah and the children of Israel will be gathered together, and they'll appoint themselves one head, and will go up from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Comment in verses 8 and 9, When Gomer had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore another son. Yahweh said, Name him Lo-Ammi, which means not my people. Yahweh says the interpretation is, You are not my people, and I will not be yours. So far, the prophetic interpretations of the names are, You failed, you've quit on me, you won't make a decision for me, you keep going back and forth, I'll wipe you out, I'll take no pity, you're not my people, and I'm not your God. In verses 10 and 11, Yahweh will satisfy himself yet. There will be a day when the children of Israel are as numerous as the sand of the sea, and whereas now he's told them, You're not my people, they'll be called sons of the living God. In that day God will gather Judah and Israel together and appoint one head over them, which we know is the Lord Jesus. In that day great will be the day of Jezreel, which means great will be the thing God sows in that day. Hosea 2 is next.